I still don't tell this story at dinner parties. People ask me, they always do, Claire, you were there. You actually saw it. And I nod and I say a little and then I change the subject. Because the truth is, some things you see, you don't want to hand around a table like a photograph. Some things you keep folded up small in a pocket near your chest, and you only take them out when you're alone. But I'm going to tell you now, all of it. Because there was a man that day who did something I have never been able to explain. Not to my sister, not to the police, not to myself. And after 11 years, I think somebody should know. So let me take you back. It was a Saturday in late June. One of those London mornings that can't make up its mind. The sky was that thin, milky gray, the kind that isn't quite rain and isn't quite sun, and the air smelled of hot pavement and diesel and faintly of cut grass drifting over from the park. I was 31, a ward nurse from Leeds, up in the city for one day only, because my little sister Bethan had never seen the palace and she'd gone on about it for months. So there we were, two women in comfortable shoes, a fold-out map neither of us could read properly, and a bag of overpriced sandwiches from a shop near Victoria. I remember Bethan was in a good mood. She kept stopping to take pictures of pigeons, not the palace, the pigeons. That was her all over. By late morning we drifted up toward the top of the park, near the corner where the traffic funnels round and the tourists gather thick as bees. You know the spot, the wide pavement, the black railings, the guardsman standing there in the red tunic and the tall bearskin cap, still as a statue, sweat probably running down inside that heavy wool, but you'd never know it from his face. There was a small crowd around him already. There always is. I want you to picture it properly, because in a minute everything changes, and I need you to feel how ordinary it was first. Children pressed up to the railing, giggling, daring each other to make him laugh. A tour guide with a little flag held high, herding a line of Italian visitors. A man in a bright yellow raincoat filming on his phone, walking backward, nearly tripping over a bin. Two women selling Union Jack umbrellas, the distant clip-clop of a horse somewhere. A busker murdering a Beatles song, and that low, constant hum of a city that never fully goes quiet. The guard didn't move, not a muscle. I remember thinking, how does anyone do that? Stand so completely still while the whole loud, silly world swirls around them. I said something like that to Bethan. She laughed and said, "He's probably asleep with his eyes open, poor lad." We didn't know his name then. I learned it later. Everyone did. His name was Guardsman Elliot Shaw, 24 years old, from a small town near Carlisle, the kind of place where everyone knows your dad. I found that out weeks after from a newspaper, sitting alone in my kitchen with the tap dripping and my tea going cold. But that morning he was just the guard, a shape, a costume, a photograph waiting to happen. That's the thing I keep coming back to all these years later. How we look at people like that, the ones in uniform, the ones standing still, and we forget there's a whole person in there. A heartbeat, a history, a thing inside them we can't see. I forgot too, right up until the moment I couldn't anymore. Now the little girl. I noticed her before any of it happened, and I think that's why I can't let this go. Because I saw her, alive and small and completely unbothered, minutes before. She was maybe 6, 7 at most. She had a red coat. I remember the red coat so clearly, this bright cherry red against all the gray, and one of those clip-on hair bows that had gone slightly crooked. She was holding a paper windmill on a stick, the kind you buy from a cart, and she kept blowing on it to make it spin. She wasn't with the main crowd. She'd wandered a little the way small children do, out toward the edge of the pavement where it meets the road. Her mother was close, but not close enough, you know how it is. The mum was digging in her handbag for something, phone or purse, distracted for just a few seconds. Just a few seconds, that's all it ever takes. The little girl in the red coat blew on her windmill. It spun. She laughed. A private, delighted little laugh at nothing, at everything, the way children laugh when the world is still simple. I smiled at her, she didn't see me. That's my last clean memory of before, a child laughing at a paper windmill. And then the world tore in half. I have tried so many times to describe the sound. I can't, not properly, because it wasn't really a sound. It was a thing that happened to you. It came up through the ground and through the soles of your feet and hit you in the chest like a fist made of air. A great, flat, terrible whump, and then a half-second of complete silence where the whole world just stopped. It came from over toward the park, down and to the left near the road, maybe 100 yards off past the trees. I didn't see it happen. I only felt it, a pressure, a wave. My ears rang like someone had clapped their hands over them. And then the silence broke, and everything came at once. Screaming, so much screaming. The high animal sound of a crowd that doesn't yet understand what it's afraid of. Car alarms, dozens of them, all going off together in a horrible chorus. Glass, the tinkling, raining sound of glass coming down. A great gray cloud of dust and smoke rolling up over the treetops, spreading, blotting out that thin, milky sky. People ran. That's the thing nobody tells you about a crowd in terror. It doesn't move like water. It moves like a stampede, all directions at once. People shoving, falling, trampling. A pushchair knocked sideways. A man's shoe left behind on the pavement, just sitting there. Bethan grabbed my arm so hard she left bruises I found the next day. I remember thinking in that strange flat way your brain works in a crisis, this is a bomb. This is a bomb. I am at a bomb. I'm a nurse. I've seen a lot. Road accidents, cardiac arrests, the worst of what a Saturday night in A&E can throw at you. And still, nothing had prepared me for the sheer size of that fear. It filled everything. It was in my mouth. And in all of that, all that noise and dust and panic, I looked back toward the railing. Toward the guard. And Guardsman Elliot Shaw had not moved. I need you to understand what that meant. A bomb had just gone off, 100 yards away. The ground was still shaking. People were screaming, running, bleeding maybe. Every single instinct a human body has was screaming run. Every one. And this young man in the red tunic and the tall black cap stood exactly where he had stood a minute before, rifle at his shoulder, eyes forward, absolutely, impossibly still. I remember it hit me like a second shock. Almost angry, I felt. Why isn't he doing something? Why is he just standing there? And then, right underneath that, a strange creeping awe. Because I understood dimly that this was the point of him. That his stillness was not stupidity. It was a promise. A promise made by a man to something bigger than himself, that he would stand his post, that this ground was his, that whatever happened he would not be the one to run. His jaw was tight. I could see that even from where I was, a muscle ticking in his cheek. His eyes flicked once, fast, left and right, taking it all in and then locked forward again. He was terrified. Of course he was. He was a 24-year-old boy from near Carlisle and he was terrified. And he did not move. I have thought about that jaw muscle for 11 years. Then I heard the mother scream. Not like the others. This was different. This was a single word torn out of a body, the worst sound I have ever heard a human being make. Nora. I turned, and my stomach dropped through the earth. The little girl, the red coat, the windmill. She'd been knocked down. In the first surge of the panicked crowd, the stampede, she'd been separated from her mother and knocked flat onto the pavement, right at the edge, right where the pavement dropped to the road. And people were still running, not seeing her, a small red shape on the ground and 100 pounding feet. Her mother was fighting toward her, clawing against the current of bodies and being pushed back, screaming that name over and over. Nora, Nora. And the little girl wasn't getting up. She was curled on her side, one arm over her head, not moving, and I couldn't tell. I'm a nurse and I still couldn't tell from there whether she was stunned or hurt or worse. And a bus had lurched to a stop in the road, half up on the pavement, wrong-angled, its driver white-faced behind the glass, and the little girl in the red coat was lying almost under its front wheel. I started to move. I did. Something in me, the nurse in me, unfroze and lunged forward, but Bethan had my arm and the crowd was between me and the child. A wall of screaming people, and I was too far. I was 30 feet too far and 100 bodies too late. I wasn't going to reach her. Nobody was going to reach her. Except, out of the corner of my eye, a flash of red. Not the coat, not the little girl. The tunic. I turned my head and I saw Guardsman Elliot Shaw, who had stood through a bomb, who had not flinched, who had held his post like the ground was welded to his boots. I saw him break. I saw him break his post. He came off that spot like something released. In one movement, his rifle was slung and he was over the low railing and he was running. Running the way I have only ever seen soldiers run. Low and hard and fast, straight through the panicking crowd, shouldering people aside. His cap gone tumbling off his head somewhere behind him. And I remember that too, the sight of him bareheaded, so suddenly young. His short dark hair, just a boy after all, running flat out toward the little girl in the red coat lying in the road. And I thought, everyone near me thought, you could feel it, he'll never make it. He's too far, the bus, the crowd. He wasn't too far. He crossed that distance in a handful of seconds that felt like an hour. And he reached her. And he scooped her up off the ground, one arm under, one arm round, the way you lift something more precious than yourself. And he rolled, twisting his own body between the child and the road, taking the fall on his own shoulder and back, as a fresh surge of the crowd went over the both of them. For a second I couldn't see them at all, just legs and bodies and dust. Then the surge passed. And there he was, on his knees on the filthy pavement, his beautiful red tunic torn at the shoulder and smeared gray, and in his arms, held up against his chest safe, was the little girl. Nora. Alive, blinking, confused, beginning in that delayed way children do to cry. Alive. Her mother reached them a moment later and half collapsed onto the both of them, sobbing, her hands going everywhere over her daughter's face and arms and legs, checking, the way mothers do, and the guardsman gently, carefully, passed the little girl into her arms. And people were crying, strangers, all around me, grown adults with their hands over their mouths, crying, because we had all just watched a man run toward a bomb site, toward the danger everyone else was fleeing, to save a child he had never met. I was crying, Bethan was crying. I thought that was the end of it. I thought that was the story. The brave guard, the saved child, the weeping crowd. A beautiful, terrible thing, but a finished thing. It wasn't finished. Because that was when Guardsman Elliot Shaw did the thing I have never been able to explain. He didn't get up. The little girl was safe, in her mother's arms. Everyone expected him to stand, to gather himself, to go back, or to help, or to do something. That's what you do. The moment's over. You move on to the next thing. He didn't move on. He stayed on his knees, and he was looking at the little girl, at Nora, with the strangest expression I have ever seen on a human face. Not relief, not pride. Something like recognition. Like he'd seen a ghost. His face had gone completely white, whiter than the shock could account for, and his mouth was moving, and at first I thought he was praying or just breathing hard. But then I got closer. I'd pushed through by then. I was maybe 10 feet away in nurse mode, meaning to check them all over, and I heard what he was saying. He was saying, very quietly, over and over, staring at that little girl's face. "It's you, it's you, it's you." The mother heard it too. She looked up at him, still holding her daughter, and her face changed from gratitude to confusion to something almost afraid. "I'm sorry," she said. Do you know her? Do you know my daughter?" And Guardsman Elliot Shaw looked up at her. This soldier, this stranger, tears standing in his eyes and cutting clean lines through the gray dust on his cheeks. And he said something that made the hair stand up on my arms. He said, "She said she'd come back. She said she'd find me, she promised." The mother stared at him. "Who did? What are you talking about? She's 6. She's never met you." "I know," he said, and his voice broke completely. "I know she hasn't. That's what I don't understand." And then he looked back down at the little girl, at Nora, at this 6-year-old stranger he had just pulled from under a bus. And the little girl, who had been crying, who had been confused, who by every possible measure should not have known this man from any other man on earth. The little girl stopped crying, and she looked straight up at him. And she smiled, a slow, calm, knowing smile far too old for her small face. And she said one word. I heard it. I was 10 feet away, and I heard it clear as a bell over all the sirens and the screaming. She said, "Finally, I'll tell you what happened next in part 2. I'll tell you what the guardsman said when the paramedics finally pulled him away. I'll tell you what I found out about him, about where he'd been, about the other little girl, the one from years before, the one nobody was supposed to talk about. Because that one word from that little girl's mouth was only the beginning of the thing no one could understand. Finally, I still hear it, 11 years later. In the quiet, I still hear it finally. I keep starting there because that's where my whole life split into a before and an after. But let me slow down. Let me tell it properly, the way it happened, and not the way memory rushes it. Because after that word, everything went very fast, and then everything went very slow, and I was in the middle of all of it. The sirens arrived first as a color, oddly enough blue light washing across the dust cloud before you could even hear the vehicles. Then the sound, layered and huge, police, ambulances, something heavier behind them that I later understood was the bomb squad. The whole weight of a city's emergency machinery, arriving all at once, the way it does when the worst thing has happened. And I want to be honest with you about something, because I promised I would tell all of it. For those first few minutes, I wasn't thinking about the guardsman and his strange words at all. I couldn't afford to, because I'm a nurse, and there were hurt people everywhere, and training took over the way it does. It just takes you, like a hand on the back of your neck, and suddenly you're not scared anymore, you're working. I went to the nearest person down. A man older, maybe 60, sitting against the railing with blood running from a cut above his ear and that gray, faraway look that frightens me more than blood ever will. I knelt. I talked to him. I kept him talking back name, where he was from, was he here alone, because a person who's talking is a person who's still with you. Bethan, God bless her, she's not medical at all, but she did exactly what I told her. Pressed a scarf to a woman's arm, sat with a teenager who was hyperventilating and just held his hand. In a crisis you find out what people are made of, and my little sister who takes photographs of pigeons, she was made of good strong stuff. So for a while I lost sight of him, of Guardsman Shaw. When I found him again, he was standing. He'd got to his feet. Somebody had put a hand on his shoulder, another soldier, I realized, one of his own, come running from the direction of the barracks. And Shaw was standing there swaying slightly, his torn tunic hanging off one shoulder, dust in his hair, and he was staring back over the crowd toward the mother and the little girl, toward Nora. They were being led away by a paramedic. The mother had Nora on her hip, wouldn't put her down, wouldn't let anyone else touch her. And Nora, this is the part I can still see so clearly, Nora had her chin on her mother's shoulder, facing backward, looking at him. The whole way as her mother carried her off toward the ambulances, that little girl kept her eyes on the guardsman. Didn't blink, didn't wave, just watched him, calm as anything, like she was making sure of something, like she was checking he was still there. And he watched her go. The other soldier was saying something to him. I could see his mouth moving. Are you hurt, mate? Are you hit? Let's get you seen to, the ordinary words. And Shaw wasn't answering. He was just watching that little red coat get smaller and smaller. Then the paramedics reached him too, and there was that whole business of checking him over, and he let them, distantly, the The way you let someone do something to you when your mind is entirely somewhere else. Cut on his forearm, bruising already blooming up his shoulder and back where the crowd had gone over him. But nothing broken, nothing serious. Nothing you could see. I got to him maybe 10 minutes later. The immediate chaos had thinned by then. The truly injured had been carried off. Police tape was going up. They were moving all of us back, away from the park, and there was a strange, ringing calm settling over everything. The calm that comes after the worst has passed and everyone is too shocked to speak. He was sitting on the low curb near the railing, alone for a moment, a foil blanket round his shoulders that he clearly hadn't asked for and didn't want. His bearskin cap was gone. Someone had recovered his rifle. His hands were shaking, not badly, just a fine tremor, and he was staring at nothing. I sat down next to him. I don't know why, I just did. "You did a brave thing," I said. He didn't look at me. "I broke my post," he said. "You saved a child's life." "I broke my post," he said again, and there was something so bleak in it that I understood this was costing him something. That in whatever world he lived in whatever code he'd sworn himself to, leaving that spot was a kind of failing, even to save a life, and he was going to carry both things at once forever. The pride and the wound of it. I've thought about that a lot since. How the same act can be the bravest and the most broken thing a person ever does. "I'm a nurse," I told him. "Let me look at that arm." He let me. His forearm was cut, not deep, and I did what I could with what the paramedics had left. And while I worked quietly, not looking up at him, I said, "What did you mean, back there with the little girl?" His hand went still under mine. "You heard that," he said. "I did." He was quiet for a long time, long enough that I thought he wasn't going to answer at all. The blue lights swept over us, over and over, and somewhere a police officer was calling out for everyone to keep moving please. And then he said, very low, "Can I tell you something, and you won't say I've lost my mind?" "I've heard a lot of things," I said. "In my job, I promise you I won't." He looked at me then, for the first time properly, and his eyes were this pale gray, red-rimmed and so terribly young and so terribly old at the same time. "4 years ago," he said, "before all this, before I ever put on this uniform, I wasn't a good lad. I want you to understand that first. I want to be honest about it." This is what he told me, sitting on that curb with the city broken around us. I've never forgotten a word of it. I couldn't if I tried. He told me that at 20 he'd been going nowhere. His father had died when he was 17, the one everyone in that small town near Carlisle had known, and after that he'd come apart the way boys do when the man who was supposed to show them how to be a man is suddenly gone. He'd got in with a bad lot. Drinking. Fighting. A couple of nights in a cell. He'd broken his mother's heart, he said, and he knew it, and he hated himself for it, and hating himself just made him worse. And then one winter night, 4 years before the bomb, he'd been walking home along a canal path. Drunk. Angry. At the lowest he'd ever been. He didn't spell out for me exactly what was in his mind that night, but he didn't have to. I've sat with enough people to know the shape of it. He was on that towpath in the freezing dark, and he was thinking about not going home at all. And he heard a child crying. "I thought I was imagining it," he said. "It was gone midnight, middle of winter. What would a kid be doing out there?" But he followed the sound. Down under a bridge near the black water where somebody he never found out the whole story. The police were vague about it after, where somebody had left a little girl. A little girl, maybe 5 years old, in a thin coat, sitting by the canal in the freezing dark, crying. He got her away from the water, wrapped her in his own jacket, sat with her under that bridge and kept her warm and kept her talking until he could get someone to come. And he told me, and this is where his voice went strange, he told me that while they waited, this tiny freezing child looked up at him, this stranger who by rights should have terrified her, and she wasn't frightened of him at all. Not for a second. She just trusted me, he said, completely, like she'd been waiting for me, And I remember thinking nobody's looked at me like that in years, like I was worth something, like I was one of the good ones. The girl was taken to hospital that night. She was all right physically. Cold, frightened, but all right. And Shaw gave his statement and went home, and something had changed in him. He couldn't explain it. He'd walked down to that canal one man and walked home another. Within a year he'd cleaned himself up, cut off the bad lot, and joined the army. And in time he'd earned his place standing guard in that red tunic in the heart of London. "That little girl saved my life," he said. "Not the other way round. Everyone thinks I saved her, but I was the one who was drowning that night. She's the reason I'm anything at all." I was very quiet. My hands had stopped moving on his arm. "What happened to her?" I asked. "After?" And here his face did that thing again. That white, haunted thing. "That's just it," he said. "I never saw her again. They took her that night and I asked, but they wouldn't tell me, data protection, all that. She wasn't mine. I was just the fellow who found her. But before they took her in the ambulance, she grabbed my finger, this tiny hand, and she looked at me and she said—" He stopped. He had to gather himself. "She said, 'I'll find you again, I promise. I'll come back.' And I laughed, the way you do with a little one. I said, 'Course you will, sweetheart. Because what else do you say?' And they closed the doors and drove away, and that was 4 years ago, and I have thought about that child every single day since." The blue lights swept over us again. "And today," he said, and now the tears were coming and he didn't fight them. "Today a bomb goes off and I'm standing my post, and I see a little girl get knocked down in the road, and I don't even think, I just go and I pick her up." "Nora," I whispered. "And she looks up at me," he said. "And I know that face. I've seen that face every night for 4 years. It's her. It's the same eyes. It's her." But I started and stopped, because there was an impossible in what he was saying, and we both knew it, and I could see him seeing it too, and it was tearing him apart. "Elliot, the little girl by the canal, 4 years ago, she was 5. "Yes," he said. "Then now she'd be 9, maybe 10. "Yes," he said, and he looked at me with those pale gray eyes full of tears and terror and a kind of desperate breaking hope. "And Nora's 6. I know, it can't be her. It's not possible. The ages are wrong, everything's wrong." Then how," he said, "did she look up at me, a stranger, a man she has never met in her life? How did she look up at me and smile like she'd been waiting? How did she say finally, a 6-year-old, finally, like I was late, like she'd been keeping an appointment?" I didn't have an answer. I still don't. "There's no way she could know," he said, quietly now spent. "No way in the world. It's not the same child. I know it isn't. But I swear to you, I swear on my father's grave, when I looked into that little girl's eyes today, the same thing looked back out at me. The exact same thing. And it knew me. I have gone over this 1,000 times in the years since, trying to find the ordinary explanation. There's always an ordinary explanation, isn't there? That's what we tell ourselves. Maybe he was in shock, and his exhausted, terrified mind reached for the most powerful memory it had, the child by the canal, and stamped it over the child in front of him. Trauma does strange things. I've seen it in patients. The mind protecting itself, patterning, filling in gaps. Maybe the little girl said something that only sounded like finally. Children mumble. Adrenaline distorts. I heard it, but I heard it through sirens and screaming, and memory is a liar even at the best of times. Maybe. But I was there, and I'll tell you what I felt, and you can make of it what you will. I felt, kneeling on that pavement with that shaking young man, that I had stepped for a moment through a very thin place in the world. A place where the ordinary rules had gone soft, where something old and quiet and much larger than any of us had reached down, just for a heartbeat, and touched 2 people who needed touching. I don't have a word for it. I never have. He didn't either. That was the whole point. That was the thing no one could understand, least of all the man it happened to. They came for him then, his sergeant and an officer. And there was a whole business of getting him back to the barracks, statements to be taken, a debrief, all the machinery of the army closing round its own. He stood up. The foil blanket slid off. He straightened, even torn and filthy and bruised, he straightened, and something of the soldier came back into him. But before they led him away, he turned back to me. "Will you do something for me?" he said. "If I can." "The little girl, Nora, they'll have taken her to hospital to be checked. Will you find out just that she's all right? I can't go, I'm not allowed, but you're a nurse. You could ask. Will you just find out she's safe? And if you can," his voice caught, "if you can, tell her." He stopped. He didn't seem to know how to finish it. "Tell her what?" I said gently. He thought for a long moment. "Tell her thank you," he said. "She'll know why." And then they took him. I watched him walk away between the two soldiers, tall and torn in his red tunic, back straight, not looking round. And I stood there on the broken pavement with my sister's hand finding mine, and I made him a promise I fully intended to keep. I did keep it. I found out about Nora. It took me 2 days and a great deal of quiet nursing network favor calling, but I found out. And what I found out about that little girl, and about her mother, and about a name in a file from 4 years before, is the part of this story I have told almost no one. Because it's the part where the thing no one could understand stopped being something I could explain away. I'll tell you in part 3. Just before I do, let me leave you with the last thing Guardsman Elliot Shaw said to me that day. He said it over his shoulder, half-turned, as they led him off into all those blue lights. He said, "People think the brave thing was running toward the bomb." He shook his head. "The brave thing," he said, "is believing she really did come back. It took me 2 days to find out about Nora." I want to be careful here because I'm going to tell you what I learned and it isn't tidy. I'm not going to hand you a neat little bow at the end and say, "And that's what really happened," because I don't know what really happened. 11 years on, I still don't. That's the whole reason I'm telling you at all. But I'll tell you what I found, and you can sit with it the way I've had to. Bethan and I didn't go home that Saturday. We couldn't. The trains were a mess. Half the city was locked down, and anyway I couldn't leave. Not with a promise made. We got a cheap room in a little hotel near the station, 2 narrow beds and a window that wouldn't open all the way, and I lay awake most of the night listening to the sirens still going out there in the dark and hearing that word. Finally, in the morning, I started making calls. I've been a nurse a long time. You build up a web of people, a friend of a friend who trained with you, someone who moved to a London hospital years back, that whole quiet sisterhood of women who have held strangers' hands at 3 in the morning. I didn't ask anyone to break a rule. I want to be clear about that. I just asked gently through the right people, the little girl from near the park yesterday, the one in the red coat, is she all right? The way one nurse asks another. And the word came back late on the Sunday, she was fine. Bruised, shaken. A cracked something in her wrist, small, the kind of thing that heals clean in a child. Kept in overnight for observation because of the crowd crush, more caution than need. Discharged the Monday morning into her mother's arms. Nora was fine. I sat on the edge of that narrow hotel bed when I heard it and I cried, properly cried, the kind you've been holding 2 days. Bethan put her arms round me and didn't say anything, which was the right thing. She was fine. He'd want to know she was fine. I thought that was the end of my part in it. I really did. But then the nurse who'd passed the message, a lovely woman, sharp as a tack, worked the children's ward. She said one more thing, just conversationally, just filling the silence. She said, "Sad little history on that family, though. The mums had a hard road. And I should have let it go. It wasn't mine to ask, but I didn't let it go." "What do you mean?" I said. Here is what she told me. And here is where I have to be careful and honest, and where the ordinary world starts to go thin again. Nora's mother, her name was Rachel, had a hard road, yes, because Nora was not Rachel's first child. Rachel had had a daughter before, years earlier, a little girl, and that little girl had died. I felt the room tilt when she said it. I made myself keep my voice level. How? I asked. When? She didn't have all the details. It was ward gossip, kindly meant, half-remembered, but the shape of it was this. Rachel had gone through something terrible in her 20s, a bad relationship, a worse man. There'd been a period where she couldn't cope, couldn't keep her daughter safe, and this is the part that came out sideways that the nurse only half knew. There'd been a night, one winter, where the child had ended up out in the cold, alone, somewhere she should never have been. And the little girl had been found. Someone had found her that night, out in the dark, and got her to safety. But something had gone wrong later. Not that night. The child was all right that night. But a few years after, an illness, a sudden thing, the way it sometimes cruelly is with children. And Rachel's first daughter had died at 8 years old. And Rachel had rebuilt her life. Slowly, painfully, got herself right, got herself safe, and years later she'd had Nora. I sat very still with the phone against my ear. The first little girl, I said, and my mouth had gone dry. Do you happen to know her name? And the nurse said, casual, not knowing what she was handing me, not knowing it would go through me like cold water. Grace, I think, little Grace. Now, I have to stop here and be a truthful narrator, because I promised you I would. I did not know, I have never known for certain, that the little girl Elliot Shaw found by that canal 4 years before was Rachel's first daughter, Grace. He never knew her name. Rachel, when I later, very carefully met her, did not want to speak of that time at all, and I did not have the heart or the right to press her. The records that might have proved it, one way or the other, were never mine to see. So I can't stand here and tell you it was the same child. I can't prove the little girl under the bridge grew up to be the little girl who died at 8. The timeline sort of fits and sort of doesn't. The details are blurred by grief and gossip and years. A careful person, a sensible person would say, it's a coincidence. Cold nights and lost children in canals are, sadly, not so rare. The mind wants to draw a line between 2 dots because a line is more bearable than 2 dots alone. A careful person would say that. But here is what I keep coming back to. Here is the thing I cannot put down. Elliot Shaw found a freezing little girl by a canal one winter night, and that child looked up at a broken young man and trusted him completely, and told him, I'll find you again, I promise, I'll come back. And years later that child died. And years after that, a different little girl, a little girl born to the same grieving mother, a little girl who could not possibly have known him, who had never met him, who was too young by every measure. That little girl was knocked into a road by a bomb blast, and out of an entire panicking city. The one person who reached her, the one man who broke every rule he'd sworn himself to and came running, was Elliot Shaw. The same man. The exact same man. Out of 8 million people in London that day, him. And she looked up at him, and she smiled like she'd been waiting. And she said finally, You tell me. I've had 11 years and I can't tell you. I've turned it every way there is. And every ordinary explanation I build, it holds for a while and then it cracks right there at that one word. Finally. Because a frightened 6-year-old pulled from under a bus does not look at the stranger holding her and smile a slow, knowing smile and say finally as if a very long wait were finally over. Unless something in this world does not end when we think it ends. Unless a promise made by a dying child is a real thing, a solid thing, that goes on existing somewhere after the child is gone, and waits, and finds its way home. Unless love, that particular fierce animal love between a person who was drowning and the person who saved them, unless that is stronger than the small facts of ages and dates, and which body it happens to be wearing. I don't have the theology for it. I'm not even sure I have the faith for it. I'm a nurse from Leeds. I believe in blood pressure and clean hands and the things you can measure. But I was there. And I felt the world go thin. I met Rachel once more, about a month later. I'd written to her carefully, gently, just as the nurse who'd been there that day, hopping her daughter, was healing. She wrote back, and then she rang, and one gray afternoon we met in a cafe near a park, not that park, and Nora was with her. Nora was full of beans, completely recovered, the wonderful resilience of small children chattering about a cartoon, drawing on a paper napkin. An ordinary, happy, extraordinary little girl. Whatever I'd half expected, some solemn, otherworldly child, she wasn't that. She was 6. She wanted a hot chocolate with extra marshmallows. Rachel and I talked, not about the hard things, about the day a little, about how grateful she was to the guardsman who'd saved her girl. She tried to find out his name to thank him and hadn't been able to, and I decided in that moment not to tell her everything I knew or thought I knew. It wasn't mine to hand her. Some doors you don't open for another person. You let them find the handle themselves if they ever want to. But near the end, as we were gathering our coats, Nora looked up from her drawing. She looked at me, really looked, the way she'd looked at him that day, and she said, out of nowhere in that bright, small voice, "Is the soldier man okay?" Her mother laughed, a little startled. "What soldier man, love?" "The one who caught me," Nora said, matter of fact, going back to her drawing. "When I fell, he was sad." She colored in a corner of her napkin. "Tell him I'm not sad, tell him it worked out. He always worries." He always worries. Present tense, always, as if she'd known him a long, long time. Rachel laughed again and shook her head. "Kids, honestly, where do they get it?" And I laughed too, because what else do you do? And we said our goodbyes. And I walked out into the gray afternoon with my heart going like a drum. Tell him it worked out. He always worries. I never told Rachel. I don't think I ever will. But I told him. I found Elliot Shaw again about 6 weeks after the bomb. It wasn't easy, the army closes round its own, like I said, but a card, passed through the right hands, eventually reached him, and he rang me one evening and we talked for over an hour. He was doing all right, better than all right. Something had settled in him, he said. The old weight he'd carried, the drowning feeling, the not being worth anything, it had lifted. He didn't fully understand it and he'd stopped trying to. He was still serving, still standing his post when they let him, straight-backed in the red tunic. I told him Nora was completely well. He made a sound when I said it, a long breath out, like something he'd been holding for weeks. And then I told him the rest. What she'd said in the cafe, tell him it worked out, he always worries. He was quiet for a long time on the line, so long I thought we'd been cut off. Then he said very softly, I do worry. And that was all. He didn't try to solve it. He didn't reach for an explanation the way I always did. He just accepted it, let it be the strange, warm, unexplainable thing it was, and let it rest. I think that's why it healed him and it never quite healed me. He didn't need to understand it. He just needed it to be true. I'm 62 now. I retired last year after a lifetime on the wards. I've held a great many hands. I've been present at the very start of some lives and the very end of a great many others, and I've learned that the line between those two things, the start and the end, is not nearly as solid as we like to pretend when we're young and sure of everything. People ask me sometimes, the ones who know I was there that day, what actually happened? What did the guard detect? What was the thing no one could understand? And I used to try to explain. The bomb, the crowd, the little girl in the road, the man who broke his post, the past, the canal, the promise, the word, finally. I'd lay it all out and watch them try to make it fit and fail the same way I failed. I don't try anymore. Now when they ask me what happened that day near Hyde Park, I just tell them the truth, the only truth I've got. I tell them, a very brave young man ran toward a bomb to save a stranger's child. And when he picked her up out of the road, when he looked into that little girl's face, somebody who loved him, who'd promised to come back, kept her promise. That's all. That's everything. That's the thing no one could understand, and the only thing I've ever needed to. She said she'd find him again. And out of all the people in all the world, she did.